I don't usually do follow-up reviews to opening weekend film reviews I've already published, but I made that review when I had seen Sinners twice, and now I've seen it 3 times.
How many?
3.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. My previous video that I published here on YouTube was my opening weekend review of Ryan Coogler's Sinners. I had already seen it twice at that point. Most of the video I wrote after watching the film at an early press screening, which was in 70mm IMAX. By the way, if you are able to watch it in 70mm IMAX, I highly recommend doing so. It is absolutely the most optimal way to experience the film. Now that being said, I looked at the map of where the 70mm IMAX screenings are happening, and there were many states listed where there were 0 screenings available, so I understand that it is not an option for everyone, and I'm not going to shame anyone who isn't able to make it out to one of those screenings. It's merely a recommendation with no aggression attached to it. Also, Ryan Coogler gets a cut of the box office gross, so you paying to see it at the cinema is putting that money back in the pocket of the artist who created it. The second time I saw the film, it was at a local cinema, one that is less out of the way than where I went for my press screening, and upon rewatching, there were multiple new details I picked up on. I talked about some of that new insight I had gained into Ryan Coogler's world building and the various inspirations he drew on from world history in that review, but upon seeing it a third time, I gained even more insight, so I wanted to share some of that in a follow-up video, especially since there was a much higher than usual amount of interest in my opinions about a new film. Now, if you already followed or you went and followed my Letterboxd account, then you already saw me talk about some of these things, but considering that I have less than 1,000 followers on Letterboxd, I figured it's a safe guess that many of the people who watched my first review have not seen my follow-up comments about the film. This isn't the only thing we're going to talk about. We will cover a couple of things, whether it's elaborating on some of the details I talked about in my first review or new things that I didn't really get into discussing in that video. I also figured that since there were some people who were commenting on that video that it was the first time that they had seen anything that I have posted on here, I might clarify a bit about the various inspirations that inform my perspective in how I go about watching and analyzing films whenever I make new reviews. And I will also add that another reason why I wanted to make this review is to try to convince more people to go back and see Ryan Coogler's Sinners at the cinema once again, or perhaps even for the first time. Since some people were saying that they don't normally see films more than once at the cinema. Now, I wouldn't say that I rewatch every film during their theatrical release, but if I find something that I get really fixated on, then yes, I've been known to go back and do at least a second or third rewatch. My record multiple rewatches at the cinema have actually gone up into the double digits. House of Gucci, Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, Avatar: The Way of Water, and Knives Out, all of those were double-digit watches at the cinema. But anyway, on to some of the third watch details that I picked up on. Full spoilers, all the spoilers, you have been warned about spoilers, now let's begin. At the beginning of the film, when Smoke and Stack are meeting with Hogwood, that's the evil man who is selling them the property, or pretending to anyway, because he's got a murderous plan in motion. When they are inside, the twins are looking at the floor, and one of them asks about if the floor has been washed. Now, on a first watch, or even a rewatch, if you're not really looking closely for minute details like these to thread everything together, you're probably just going to focus on the fact that Hogwood responds to this question by spitting his chewing tobacco on the floor. You're going to be caught up in the visceral emotional response of something like, well, that was extremely rude and disgusting. That man is clearly a racist. I don't like him one bit. That was my initial response. But upon rewatching and continuing to hone in on these various details, here's what I noticed. When Remick reveals to Smoke and the other unturned humans that are still inside the juke joint, the fact that Hogwood is actually the leader of the clan, or at least the clan that's in that area. I don't actually know what the infrastructure of the clan is.
Y'all part of the clan? First of all, Black Lives Matter.
And the married couple that Remick had turned at the beginning of the film, the husband, Bert, is Hogwood's nephew. Hogwood had this plan to bring the full clan back and commit mass murder. Bert says that this property is a slaughter floor. Do you know what that means? Smoke and Stack, when they were asking about whether the floors had been washed, they were seeing bloodstains on the floor. Now that is truly horrific. That disturbed me more than almost anything else I saw in the film. Moving somewhat ahead, after Smoke and Stack pick up Sammy from his father's church, they go to the truck that they have hidden away, which contains all of the stolen liquor. When they remove or lift the tarp up, and this rattlesnake pops out. One of the twins kills the snake, and there's a lingering shot on the snake as it dies on the ground, and it has a diagonal head wound. Near the end of the film, when Sammy hits Remick with the guitar, a piece of the guitar lodges in Remick's head in a diagonal-shaped head wound. So that's both foreshadowing and symbolism. It's showing you, before you've even met Remick at that point, that he is a dangerous snake, but it also shows how Sammy looks up to the twins and he learns from them. He learned that guitar swinging move from the twins. Not in the sense that Sammy is going to learn to be a full-blown criminal or killer that gets into the types of things the twins were up to while they were in Chicago, but in the more sweet type of way where mentorship is another thing that Ryan Coogler is revering within this film's narrative. Like when Smoke has that encounter with the young girl in town and he offers her a paid job to watch the truck and he's coaching her on how to negotiate a better salary. Remember how I said in my first review of Sinners how I think that Ryan Coogler's Sinners is trying to say that the fundamental essence of humanity itself is to look out for one another, and that money and the pursuit of money is not the source of true happiness. This is further proof of that. Even a seemingly small encounter with a young girl that we only meet during this one part of the film is deeply meaningful. You have to care about people and build a community, and those things are far more important than acquiring money and power simply for the sake of having money and power, because doing so is inherently selfish and causes needless violence. But anyway, I know I went on a bit of a tangent there when the first point I was making was about how Sammy looks up to the twins and he learns from them. Another example of that, when Stack and Sammy are in the car together, Stack is mentoring Sammy by informing him on how to, well, you know, the club scene when Sammy and Pearline are doing something? I'm not going to be too specific because I don't know what YouTube will or will not allow me to say and with what verbiage when it concerns salacious NSFW topics, but you all saw what I saw. You know what it was. Stack told him what to do beforehand.
Are you guys having sexual intercourse?
I mean, that's certainly one type of mentorship. Oh, and another detail about my channel and some of the ways I go about making videos. I often like to throw in cutaways simply because I enjoy them. I find them entertaining. And I specifically had downloaded one of them for the purpose of using it in my first Sinners review. And then I forgot to include it in the edit because I was in a hurry and I was stressed out over there being so many talking points that I was trying to cover and trying to get that video finished in time for the opening weekend. So anyway, here's the cutaway I downloaded, courtesy of Mr. Crooks.
You know, and some of you say white people don't have any culture. Then what is this? I don't think you understand the heritage and athleticism it takes to be a professional, whimsical skedaddler. Is what I'm saying?
I know those social media algorithms are spying on me because they had put that video on my feed and had me laughing and having a good time with it weeks or maybe even months before I ever saw Sinners. Another detail from the time that we're following Stack and Sammy during their car ride. Sammy asks Stack if he can drive the car. Stack tells Sammy that he can drive the car on the way back. And then if we fast forward, after all of that bloodshed and mayhem, well, not all of it because Smoke still has a few fascists to rid the world of, and we love him for that. Sammy is the one to drive the car back, away from the juke joint. So when you rewatch the film and you see the seemingly small detail of, oh, can I drive the car? No, you can drive it on the way back. I dare you to not get well emotional over that when you see how that exchange fits into the larger story. Following Stack and Sammy's journey to the train station where we are first introduced to Mary. Mary is Stack's ex, and they have a reunion at this train station, and she was on her way out at the time, but she heard his voice, and she circled back to talk to him. They have a bit of a lover's quarrel, and he says some rather unpleasant things to her because he's trying to push her away because he doesn't believe that they can have a life together. He talks more about that when we see them once again reunited at the juke joint. So he says something to try to push her away at the train station. And she responds by telling him to go to hell. Then, while she is walking away after having said that, he says something back to her about how there will be a room there for her next to him. That's foreshadowing of the two of them becoming vampires and ending up together for, at minimum, another 60 years. So in a sense, whether you interpret this as a literal or metaphorical thing, Stack and Mary do end up in hell together because they're both undead and permanently separated from the vast majority of their loved ones. Annie had said some lines that I don't fully remember the precise verbiage of, but she said something in the film about vampires and how once you become a vampire, you are forever separated from your ancestors. It was something to that effect. And it's worth noting how in the end, once Sammy is all grown up, he's lived this life full of music, performing the blues. When he gets a surprise reunion with Vampire Stack and Vampire Mary, Sammy tells Stack that that day, before all of the violence and bloodshed, it was the happiest day of his life. And Sammy asks Stack if it was the same for him. And Stack says that it was, and that it was the last time he was able to see the sun, and it was also the last time he ever saw his brother. And mind you, this film goes above and beyond to convey how deep and loving the relationship is between Smoke and Stack. Stack has been able to live for 60 additional years as a young man who knows what sort of things he's been able to see and experience. And I don't take it lightly that these two are now able to walk around together without having to worry about this enormous level of racist violence harming them for simply being together. Partially because they now have vampire strength and vampire speed, but also because presumably, depending on the city they're in, it's probably a lot easier for them to walk around together in the 1990s than the 1930s without being attacked for being a couple. But all of that just doesn't match being able to be with his brother. So in the end, it's a bittersweet ending for Stack and Mary. Yes, they're finally able to be together in a way that they never could when they were alive, but in another sense, they're also doomed. What was the cost? That's why that exchange of dialogue at the train station about going to hell hits very differently when you are doing a rewatch. Now, I want to go through the Spotify articles as well that were brought to my attention by some very nice viewers in the comment section of my previous Sinners video. But before I do that, I'm going to try to give an abbreviated overview of why that video was including so much other information. So my YouTube channel is first and foremost focusing on reviewing and discussing films. Occasionally, I will talk about a television series, but that's been happening less and less as of late. Outside of this platform for a fair few years now, I've been more proactive in just looking things up, reading about, and watching material that informs me about a number of varying historical, socio-political things from history all over the world, more recent current events, and learning the ways that those things thread together. If and when I go to either an early press screening or I go to the opening weekend release of something at the cinema, and it's specifically something that I'm planning on reviewing, and I happen to discover that there is either subtext or more direct references to something that I've already been learning about on my own, I'm much more likely to include a mention of whatever that is in my movie review because it directly impacts how I am observing and analyzing the material of that film. I think about that expression that says something along the lines of success is when preparation meets opportunity. If I publish a film review that resonates very well with an audience that is interested in the socio-political subtext of that film, and I happen to talk about that because it's something that I'm able to recognize. A previous example of this happening is when I watched the Brazilian film Ainda Estou Aqui, and I mentioned Operation Condor because I know what that is and it relates to the subject matter of that film, and more broadly speaking, the repetitive cycle of imperialist violence that the West perpetuates against a multitude of Latin American countries. With Ryan Coogler's Sinners, it's a similar thing where having prior knowledge of a multitude of things that happen to be relevant to the film's story and its subtext, as well as Ryan Coogler's point of view, does impact mine or other viewers' perspectives of the narrative, characters, and relationships. An example of this, which I didn't mention in my first video about Sinners, when Delroy Lindo's character, Delta Slim, calls out to the prisoners who are doing labor outside while the car is driving past them. Naturally, I look at that and I think about the US prison industrial complex and how it's a means of continuing to exploit marginalized people for cheap labor, as well as the school to prison pipeline being a way for the powers that be to go out of their way to target Black and brown children to funnel them into that system for profit. Now, a film like Sinners has so many moving parts to it that you can use the film as a starting point to begin researching things that you've never really looked into beyond a superficial glance, or it can resonate with things that you're already aware of. In general, I find that the more I am able to learn, the more that I end up appreciating a lot of works of art, and I gain a better understanding of those works as well as the artists who have created those stories. The more that I learn, the more that I'm able to thread different things together, be it in the art I engage with or life outside of fiction. So if you show me a Ryan Coogler film that talks about vampires in the Jim Crow South, but the head vampire is Irish, from Ireland, with an Irish accent, where is my brain going to wander to? Probably something like that one Muhammad Ali clip from his interview in Ireland, where he's talking about looking into Irish history and finding commonality with it.
I have another thing to say. This is one thing I love and I admire about the Irish people. I studied a little of the history since I've been here. I found out you've been underdogs for years, hundreds of years, people dominating you and ruling you, and you can identify with this freedom struggle, you understand? But I just have mine on the other side of the water. But we all are fighting for the same cause and idea, but we have different reasons and different approaches.
And actually, while we are mentioning Delroy Lindo, can I just say that I have a real soft spot for seeing him because I love Romeo Must Die. So anytime I see him, that's the first thing I think of. In my last video, there were a couple of people who took issue with me saying Alia's name as Alia. And I should have remembered to include the video of her explaining to talk show hosts how to pronounce her name, because I had included that clip when I was making my video about the Y2K era of Blasian solidarity in Hollywood films.
Say your name, Aaliyah?
Alia.
Oh, jeez.
Like Muhammad Ali.
So I've been saying it wrong for a week because they told me.
I'm here to tell you.
Thank you.
Muhammad Ali.
Thank you.
Alia.
Aaliyah.
So all of this to say, when I'm doing movie reviews, especially opening weekend reviews where I find myself in a bit of a hurry, I'm being pressed by YouTube to hurry up and post these things faster, lest I be forsaken by those pesky algorithms. I don't always have a lot of time to do extra research, so I really have to rely on the knowledge that I've already been accumulating on my own. The more all of us learn, the stronger a foundation we build for ourselves in our understanding of the world and its history, of different places, their cultures, and you can call upon that knowledge whenever it's relevant, such as watching a really layered film covering a multitude of topics, historical oppression, and how it's going to resonate with the material living conditions we as the audience experience in our daily lives. But anyway, I know, a bit of a tangent, back to Ryan Coogler's Sinners. I don't use Spotify, so I really appreciate folks in the comments letting me know about these articles and how they offer some insight as well as reiterate some of the material that's presented in the film. So let's go through these. Now, I've acquired the images of these articles from hot97.com, and I will put the link along with any other citations or recommendations that I have in the pinned comment of this video. The first article I'm going to look at is dated October 5th, 1932. This means that this report is happening right before the story of Sinners, which we watch play out, excluding the mid-credits scene, of course. The headline reads, "Gang tensions rise in Chicago. Irish mob and Italian mafia clash." And then the article reads, Chicago, October 5th. Tensions between Chicago's Irish mob and the Italian mafia have reached a new high, sparking a series of skirmishes across the Windy City. This flare-up follows a period of uncertainty since the arrest of Al Capone, which left a power vacuum in the city's underworld. A source close to the situation revealed that the conflict began when a stockpile of illegal alcohol went missing from the Irish side. The Irish mob accused the Italian mafia of stealing the goods, which led to a series of retaliatory actions. However, a similar claim is now being made by the Italians, who are accusing the Irish of the same crime. With both sides now entrenched in mutual accusations, local authorities are working to calm the situation. The fear is that if the conflict isn't contained, it could escalate further. For now, Chicago's streets remain tense as both factions vie for control. Now, this is referenced in the film. There was a character, I believe it might have been Mary, but I would have to watch the film once again to double check that, who called them out at the club for pulling this reckless stunt of robbing both of these organized crime groups and stealing liquor to use at the juke joint. It's a reckless, impulsive stunt that fundamentally doesn't fix the bigger issue. The fact that they, the twins, their entire community, are all trapped in inherently violent, exploitative systems. What good does it do you to steal this international liquor to sell to your community when your community consists of folks who are being paid in plantation money? Did you know that plantation money was a thing? That's another topic for you to look up and read about when you're digging into the historical context of Ryan Coogler's Sinners. In the next article, we see that the date is February 9th, 1924. The headline reads, "Bank Robbery Rocks Clarksdale. 2 Masked Criminals on the Loose." Moving to the article itself. Clarksdale, February 9th. In a violent midday heist, Clarksdale's First National Bank became the latest victim in a string of robberies haunting the town. 2 masked men, both black, stormed the bank. One took charge with smooth, calculated commands, while the other used violent force to control the room. "There was a moment when I thought I was seeing double," said Comfort Jenkins, a teller. "The 2 men, they looked so alike, almost like they could have been twins. But then the one grabbed me by the arm and yanked me across the room. It was all a blur after that." Security guard Tom Myrtlebank tried to stop them, but was shot by one of the robbers. He survived, but is not yet in stable condition. The robbers escaped with a significant sum, and no one else was seriously injured. Authorities believe the men may be connected to similar heists that have recently hit nearby towns. The robbers remain at large, and the community is left shaken. So this article is reiterating what the film shows and tells us about how Smoke and Stack have engaged in many years of criminal activities for financial gain. I don't think there's a whole lot more I need to elaborate in that regard. They make multiple references to it throughout the film. Al Capone, instances of securing payment from Johns, just to name a couple of examples. But of course, the main reason we need to look at these articles, the main reason that folks who were watching my previous video on Sinners, was the third article, which teases a bit of information about Remick's background. The article is dated August 1st, 1911. The headline reads, "Grisly Discovery at Boston Harbor. Immigrant ship wrecked, no survivors." The article reads, Boston Harbor, August 1st. Early this morning, dock workers discovered the wreckage of the Celtic Hare, a ship that had arrived overnight carrying Irish immigrants. Upon boarding, they found blood-soaked decks, burned remnants, and a haunting silence. There were no survivors and no bodies to be found. Witnesses reported seeing strange flickering lights and hearing music from a distance the night prior as it approached, as if an Irish celebration had been taking place aboard the ship. But the festivities must have turned to horror. The ship's cabins were destroyed and scorched furniture lay scattered. Only signs of brutal violence and fire remained. As the workers approached, a local woman claimed to have seen a lone man fleeing the scene, his skin reportedly smoking as he disappeared into the shadows. The cause of the wreck and the mysterious disappearance of all aboard is under investigation by authorities. So if Sinners takes place in 1932 and the article is from 1911, that means Remick has been in the colonies for about 20 years when we meet him. If his immigration was in 1911, then my theory is still somewhat intact that he was at least in Ireland during the Great Hunger, and by extension, he's aware of the Choctaw Gift. But despite my references in my previous Sinners video to various aspects of English colonial violence against Ireland for several centuries, I do not consider myself to be an expert on everything that's ever happened in Irish history. I did do a quick skim online to see if there was anything else to jump out at me to speculate about one single event that might have caused Remick to immigrate at that particular time, especially if he was already a vampire at that point. But I didn't find anything that I felt confident enough to present as a legitimate theory. I'm much more inclined to let any Irish people in the audience pose those theories of their own. The article specifically mentions a sighting of a man whose skin was smoking. The logical theory from that and the difference between how Remick dies versus the newly turned vampires that die is that with him being a much older vampire, he is slower to succumb to exposure to the sun. Also, when we first meet him in the film, his skin is smoking, he's badly injured, and he's trying to escape from the Choctaw. And the sun was setting at that point, but it was not all the way down yet, so he has to be fairly old. If you follow the Dracula story, what happened on the ship Remick arrived on could be somewhat or vaguely similar to what happens in that novel, but with a Ryan Coogler twist. The Last Voyage of the Demeter is a film adaptation of this one very specific part of the Dracula book, where Dracula is traveling overseas by boat, and one by one he begins to pick off the people on board to feed on them. That film stars Corey Hawkins, as well as one of my absolute favorites, Liam Cunningham, Irish icon, a legend. He is absolutely brilliant. So there's a couple of ways to interpret this article and theorize what might have happened. While making the journey from Ireland to Boston, Remick got hungry, and so he began to start turning people on board until there was a ship full of vampires playing music and celebrating in a manner similar to what we saw in the film. And the sun rose up into the sky before they were able to reach the place where the passengers would be let off, and the only one with the ability to survive that bit of sunrise is Remick, because he's very old. That's a very literal matter-of-fact theory about the events that may have taken place. Life, death, undead, music, sunrise, permadeath for the baby vampires. But if you are trying to extrapolate some sort of deeper meaning and perhaps symbolism of the material, if you watched my previous video on Sinners, you will have already heard me talk about how vampirism in Ryan Coogler's Sinners is an allegory for violent systems such as capitalism, the Jim Crow laws we see in action in the film, colonialism. Take capitalism as an example. Generationally speaking, if you are at least a millennial, and if you live in the States, which most of you probably do based on looking at the analytics of my previous Sinners review, how many economic recessions have you lived through? That's capitalism in action. It's not some random fluke. Regardless of Remick's good intentions that he believes he has from his point of view, vampirism is not the path to liberation for any of those people who died on that ship or the people who died at the juke joint. Ryan Coogler's version of vampirism is an inherently violent system, and thus it will chew people up and just consume indiscriminately. And for anyone who thinks I'm overreaching by drawing a connection to capitalism, there is an interview I watched Ryan Coogler do where the interviewer is talking about how an unusual detail of Ryan Coogler's story is that the vampires are not economically well off. A lot of times when you see fictional vampires, they are living in castles or mansions, depending on the time period that the story is set in. But even Remick, the head vampire, from what we can see of him, he has little to no possessions to his name. And this interviewer specifically brought up Marxism, and Ryan Coogler responded by saying something along the lines of, "Do you know where I'm from? I'm from Oakland."
But it won't make sense.
Yeah. I kind of, it's really interesting. I want to kind of like add on to what you're saying, because one of my biggest takeaways, again, about vampires as a concept, because I think Karl Marx often used like vampirism to explain capitalism, right? And he constantly used it as a metaphor. And I thought it was so brilliant in this, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but the minute they kind of lose is when they seek the white man's money, right? Because that scene, they kind of had the situation with the plantation tokens, like, no, we can't do that. And in a way, what I thought was so interesting, how that was this idea of, I don't know, I think there's this idea that imperialism and colonialism and Western European ideals and Christianity, even when it comes to the Black Church, and this, you know, and this is sacred and profane, and how that kind of functions. But I thought it was really interesting how, like, the downfall is when they kind of opened up to try and take that gold money. But then even the way you've presented these vampires, even, I love that he's an Irish, obviously, he's been colonized as well, the history of that. But it was a kind of saying, you can have this utopian world where we're all equal, and it's these marginalized communities come together. And so I kind of want to get into, like, that kind of element of it, because, you know, there's so many ways vampires represents, you know, Anne Rice's take on it, you know, all these things. Joel Gomez in the Gilda stories is like, unity is the best thing.
You really sharp. But I gotta ask you something.
Okay.
What if the vampires didn't show up? What happens to those people?
Well, exactly. It's like the same thing. It's humans and vampires aren't that different, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, the better the devil you know, but...
Yeah,
so,
but I mean, like that, like the reality is, for them, you know, everybody at that juke was gonna be dead anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was fucked before they.
Yeah.
Before Stack and Mary decided to go out there and try to get that, like, you know, they were fucked essentially the moment that they bought the meal.
So do you see that as like kind of the way it's presented that actually, again, these systems, like these, what, in a way, sorry, I'm just like very deep about this, but
No, I understand.
I just
I'm
think it's
listening.
really interesting because I think so
Yeah.
often vampires traditionally are very wealthy. They
Yeah.
take, they don't give back. Whereas these are
Yeah.
guys who are like, you know, apart from like Near Dark or like Lost Boys, you rarely see.
I love those movies, by the
Right.
way.
But
Yeah.
they're kind of impoverished vampires. So I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I feel like you've got, I want to say it's like the first actual Marxist vampire movie because it feels what you're trying to do there. And
You know
so
where I'm from?
No,
I'm from Auckland.
Oh, okay.
Zinj. Fuck. Help.
Now, when he said that, immediately I thought to myself, yes, he's talking about the Black Panthers because the Black Panthers are from Oakland. And lo and behold, you wait maybe a minute further on into this interview, and Ryan Coogler reiterates to this interviewer that the Black Panthers were founded in Oakland, very near to either, I forget exactly what he said. It was something about either where he grew up or where he lived at one point. It was something to that effect. I will include the clip.
I'm from literally the block where the Black Panthers were started.
Yeah, sorry, it's
You know what I
California
mean?
and you shot
Yeah,
this.
yeah. So when you bring up Marx, you know, I'm from a place that is very cognizant of capitalism.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And its effects. So I think that would be in my work, whether I thought about it consciously or I didn't.
These
you know?
things exist without the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I know you want me to wrap up.
No, it's okay. I'm good to take a little bit more time. I was knocked back by some of these questions. We probably gotta conversate.
Now, the Black Panthers were Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries. They were heavily targeted by the US government, and they've actually repeatedly been brought up in the things that I've been watching this year. They were mentioned in Freaky Tales, which I had already reviewed here on my channel. That film is set in Oakland, and one of the directors/screenwriters is also from Oakland. Another thing I watched this year was the Black Panthers documentary from 1968. I didn't officially talk about that on YouTube in its own dedicated video, but I did mention it on Patreon more because every month I do a what I watched video where I talk about everything that I've watched for the first time the previous month or anything that I may have rewatched after many years of not seeing it that I feel like I really have something I want to say about. I rank all of those watches. I give the films or documentaries scores. Obviously, the Black Panther documentary, I gave it 5 stars. And the Black Panthers were also mentioned in a Brazilian film I watched and reviewed here on YouTube called O Que É Isso, Companheiro.
But the Black Panther movement is a major challenge to the American establishment.
And what's interesting about looking into the Black Panthers and their various speeches, the things that they were saying in the documentary, is that they, along with a number of other revolutionary figures, put a lot of stress on the importance of education. And you will find quotes from people like Malcolm X and Huey Newton, where they are adamant about how important it is to read and to proactively seek out knowledge. I was even watching Boys in the Hood recently, and there's a part in that film where Lawrence Fishburne's character, Furious, is trying to teach people in his neighborhood important information about why their neighborhood and the material conditions of their lives are the way that they are. And when the question is posed about why it is that Furious knows these things, the answer that's given to that question is that he reads a lot. And in following those threads, I would make the argument that one of the reasons why Ryan Coogler's Sinners is a revolutionary work of art, a reason that I have not seen discussed as much as some of the other talking points. Admittedly, there are many of them because it's a very dense and layered film. Ryan Coogler's Sinners is fanning the flames of people being proactive in seeking out education and knowledge. They're trying to research things about the history of Jim Crow, the Mississippi Delta Chinese, the Choctaw, the Irish, and when you get people genuinely excited about learning and studying history, especially history on a global scale, that's how movements are built and real change is made. It's a very important step. I think one of the most underrated unofficial love languages, I don't know if there is an official term for it, but I absolutely love exchanging recommendations with people about revolutionary art, historical events, or figures that need to be looked up, books or other writings. I recently watched The Wind That Shakes the Barley this year because an Irish friend of mine had recommended it to me a while ago, and I kind of had the sense that it was something that I would enjoy, and I finally got around to watching it, and oh, I gained so much new insight into things that I already wanted to know more about. If Ryan Coogler is, at the very least, willing to specify in an interview that he is from the same place where the Black Panthers formed, and he's seemingly acknowledging the impact of their teachings in his own perspective and worldview as a storyteller, I think the most natural outcome from that is for me to present an offering to anyone that might be interested in the pinned comment of this video of a various assortment of films, documentaries, historical figures that I find interesting and worth exploring further. Now, some of these things, or many of these things, might be things that you already know, but it's a broad list so that anyone can hopefully find something in there that's new or something that they would like to refamiliarize themselves with. If you are only staying in this one place of one film, although it's admittedly an exceptionally well-made film, that's entirely your choice to make. But I did see quite a few comments on my previous video from people whose response to Sinners was to get excited about looking deeper into history and seeking out new knowledge, and I even received a very nice recommendation for a film called Bloody Sunday from one of the people commenting, which I have gone and added to my Letterboxd watch list. So for those people who do want to go exploring through art and history and the occasional intersection of the two, go ahead and feel free to look through the pinned comment of this video, and I hope you will find something in there that you end up enjoying watching or studying or learning more about. I am also going to include some of the Ryan Coogler interviews that I found to be particularly interesting. One really cool tidbit I heard him share in an interview was about how the reason why Ludwig Göransson became interested in the blues and ended up becoming a blues guitar player is because way back in the day, there were these black blues artists who were not able to tour as much in the States because of racism, but they were able to book touring gigs in Europe. So when they went to Sweden, Ludwig's father saw them, he became a fan of the genre, and there we have it. It got passed down to his son. Not every film review I make is going to be as neck deep in history and politics as much as Sinners has been, because it entirely depends on the art itself. Although, whenever I make my next Brazilian film review, we're going to be looking at Marighella, which is the film about the Afro-Brazilian Revolutionary. But also sometimes on my channel, I'm just goofing around and talking about Bridgerton and having a laugh over the fragile immune systems of fictional, generationally wealthy English aristocrats in the 1800s. Honestly, a few drops of rain, and those people are bedridden for days.
So good luck, England, or as we say in Ireland, Chucky our law.